Johnny Carson revealed 6 Hollywood stars who were terrible actors. Behind the desk of The Tonight Show for 30 years, Johnny Carson didn't just entertain America, he shaped its taste in entertainment. His approval could launch careers overnight. His withering wit could just as quickly deflate Hollywood's biggest egos. But what many viewers didn't realize was that television's most beloved host was also its most discerning critic. After the cameras stopped rolling and the audience went home, Carson would often share his unfiltered opinions about the celebrities he'd just interviewed. Opinions far more biting than anything he'd say on air. Johnny had an absolutely encyclopedic knowledge of film and theater, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked alongside Carson for over a decade. He could spot a performer with limited range instantly, and while he was unfailingly polite on camera, he kept a mental list of stars he considered truly terrible actors. According to those closest to him, Carson's assessments weren't casual dislikes or personal vendettas. They were the considered judgments of a man who had interviewed virtually every major star of the Golden Age, observed their careers across decades, and developed razor-sharp insights into the difference between genuine talent and manufactured celebrity. Johnny believed there was a special place in hell for beautiful people who were handed acting careers based solely on their looks, explained his longtime head writer. He'd sit in his office after the show, martini in hand, and deliver the most devastating critiques you've ever heard, and damn if he wasn't right almost every time. Most shocking to those who knew him was Carson's ability to maintain his professional charm while interviewing performers he privately considered unwatchable. The man who could eviscerate a movie star's entire career with a single sentence in private would treat that same person with perfect courtesy on air. The real Johnny came out after the show, noted a cameraman who worked on The Tonight Show for 20 years. He'd mimic their line readings or acting choices so accurately it would have you in stitches. Then he'd look at you and say, "And they pay them millions for that." Over the years, Carson's private list of Hollywood's truly terrible actors became known to his inner circle, a collection of stars whose careers were built on everything except acting talent. Today, we're revealing the 6 performers who topped Johnny's list of the Golden Age's most limited actors, stars who were famous despite their acting, not because of it. But first, we need to understand how Carson, a man with no formal film training, developed such a keen eye for detecting the difference between genuine talent and carefully packaged mediocrity. Johnny Carson, the critic behind the curtain. Before he became America's late-night king, Johnny Carson was an avid student of performance. Growing up in Nebraska during the Great Depression, young Johnny escaped into movie theaters whenever he could scrape together the admission price, developing a passion for film that would last his entire life. People forget that Johnny started as a magician, explained Carson's former executive producer. Magic teaches you to spot fakery, to recognize when someone's creating an illusion versus genuinely performing a skill. Johnny applied that same discerning eye to acting his entire life. By the time Carson took over The Tonight Show in 1962, he had developed remarkably sophisticated tastes. While publicly presenting himself as an everyman, privately he consumed classic theater, foreign films, and serious cinema alongside mainstream Hollywood fare. This background gave him a unique perspective when interviewing actors. He could discuss Shakespeare with Laurence Olivier, method acting with Marlon Brando, and physical comedy with Carol Burnett, all with genuine knowledge that surprised his guests. Johnny understood acting from the inside out, said a director who knew Carson socially. He recognized the difference between technical craft and mere celebrity, and he had absolutely no patience for beautiful people who'd been handed careers without bothering to develop actual skill. Carson's position gave him an unparalleled vantage point. For 3 decades, virtually every major star in Hollywood passed through his studio. He saw them under pressure, off script, and responding to unexpected questions, revealing their true range and intelligence in ways carefully edited film performances could hide. Johnny could tell within 30 seconds if someone had genuine acting ability, claimed his former talent coordinator. He'd throw them an unexpected question and watch how quickly they processed it, how authentic their reaction was. The pretty faces with nothing behind their eyes couldn't fake it in that environment. While unfailingly professional on camera, Carson would occasionally let slip hints of his true assessments. A slightly raised eyebrow, a momentary tightening of his smile, or a quick glance toward Ed McMahon could speak volumes to those who knew him well. After shows featuring particularly limited performers, Carson would retreat to his office and deliver what his staff called the real review, brutally honest assessments that stayed within his inner circle, but became legendary among Tonight Show staff. Now, for the first time, we're revealing the 6 stars from Hollywood's golden age who Carson privately considered the most severely talent-challenged actors to achieve major stardom, beginning with a man whose very name became shorthand for bad acting.
Fire by friction. Got out of a Boy Scout manual. The child of 5 should be able to do it.
Sonny Tufts, the man whose name became a punchline. Suffering Sonny Tufts. This exclamation, shouted by cartoon characters when facing disaster, would instantly make 1940s movie audiences laugh. The joke wasn't random, it was a direct reference to an actor Carson considered perhaps the worst to ever achieve stardom during Hollywood's golden age. Johnny had a special fascination with Sonny Tufts, revealed Carson's former head writer. He collected Tufts' performances like some people collect train wrecks. He'd sometimes screen Tufts movies for the writing staff just to demonstrate how someone so clearly limited could become a star. Sonny Tufts had the perfect pedigree on paper. Yale educated, from a prominent Boston family, tall and conventionally handsome. Paramount Pictures signed him during World War II, when many leading men were serving in the military, creating an opportunity for new male stars. What Tufts lacked, in Carson's assessment, was even a hint of acting ability. Johnny would do this devastating impression of Tufts, recalled a Tonight Show writer. He'd square his shoulders, get this completely blank expression, and recite lines with absolutely no emotional connection to their meaning. It was hilariously accurate. Carson frequently referenced Tufts in monologues throughout the 1960s and 70s, keeping the actor's reputation alive long after his brief stardom had faded. When a joke bombed, Carson might quip, "That one was written by Sonny Tufts." If a guest mentioned bad acting, Carson would inevitably steer the conversation to Tufts. "We all know Sonny," Carson once joked on air after mentioning Tufts. "We just don't know why." The line got a big laugh, but it contained Carson's genuine assessment. How had someone with such limited ability achieved even temporary stardom? The answer, Carson believed, revealed much about the studio system's ability to manufacture stars regardless of talent. Paramount had needed leading men during the war years and had the marketing machinery to create them from raw material, regardless of ability. Johnny saw Tufts as the perfect example of the studio system's cynicism, explained a former NBC executive who knew Carson well. "Give us a handsome face and we'll convince the public he's a star. Talent optional." Johnny found it both fascinating and slightly offensive as someone who respected genuine craft. Carson's fixation on Tufts' limitations represented his broader criticism of an industry that often valued appearance over ability. But at least Tufts had been largely forgotten by the time Carson began mocking him. Our next subject was still very much active when Carson began privately assessing her limited range.
Star is one thing, and a person to exist as an actress is another. And a person who has had publicity do so much for them.
Jane Mansfield, the bombshell who couldn't act. In public, Johnny Carson was unfailingly gracious when Jane Mansfield appeared on The Tonight Show. He complimented her gowns, laughed at her anecdotes, and treated her with the same professional courtesy he showed all his guests. In private, according to multiple sources close to Carson, his assessment was scathing. "She's a human publicity stunt," Carson reportedly told his staff after one particularly empty Mansfield interview. "There's no there." What particularly frustrated Carson about Mansfield was what he saw as her complete lack of effort to develop any actual performing skills despite multiple opportunities. Unlike Marilyn Monroe, who took acting seriously and worked with coaches throughout her career, Mansfield seemed content to simply be Jane Mansfield. Johnny had enormous respect for beautiful women who were also talented. Julie Andrews, Sophia Loren, Barbara Streisand, explained a former Tonight Show producer. What he couldn't stand were those who coasted on measurements alone, and to him, Mansfield was the prime example. Carson's critical eye noted how Mansfield would avoid any question requiring genuine reflection during interviews, instead pivoting to predetermined anecdotes or flirtatious banter. When pushed beyond her comfortable territory, she would giggle or affect confusion. Tactics Carson privately described as the empty toolkit of a non-actor. "She showed up, that was the performance," Carson once remarked to his writers after a Mansfield appearance. The line became something of an inside joke among the staff, a shorthand for guests who brought nothing but their physical presence to the show. What made Carson's assessment particularly cutting was that he recognized Mansfield's intelligence behind her dumb blonde act. He believed she was deliberately choosing not to develop genuine skills because her physical attributes had proven sufficient for fame. Johnny thought it was almost cynical, recalled his longtime producer. He'd say, "She's smart enough to know better, which makes it worse. At least truly terrible actors are trying and failing. She's not even trying." In Carson's view, Mansfield represented a particular type of Hollywood cynicism, the manufactured sex symbol who made no effort to transcend the packaging. While he maintained professional courtesy in their interactions, staff members recall his visible relief when her segments ended. The moment she'd walk off set, Johnny would loosen his tie and exhale like he'd just finished a demanding chore, remembered a cameraman. Then he'd look at Ed McMahon and give this tiny eye roll that spoke volumes. While Mansfield's limitations frustrated Carson because of her apparent lack of effort, our next subject represented something different. A young man with enormous popularity who seemed genuinely incapable of delivering a convincing performance despite numerous opportunities.
Western, is it?
Well, not exactly, but we did want to kind of spoof some of the Sergio Leone.
Tab Hunter, Hollywood's beautiful empty vessel. Tab Hunter embodied everything Johnny Carson found problematic about Hollywood's star system. Strikingly handsome, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and chiseled features, Hunter became a major star and teen idol in the 1950s, despite what Carson considered profound limitations as an actor. Johnny would watch Tab Hunter movies and just shake his head in amazement, recalled a writer who worked closely with Carson. He'd say, "They gave him line after line, movie after movie, and he never improved, not even accidentally." Carson had Hunter on The Tonight Show multiple times during the 1960s and 70s, always treating him with professional courtesy. But after the cameras stopped rolling, Carson would often comment on what he called Hunter's remarkable emptiness as a performer. "He acted with his jawline," Carson reportedly told his staff after one Hunter appearance. The camera would roll, and you could almost see him thinking, which side looks better, rather than considering what emotion the scene required. What particularly fascinated Carson about Hunter was the disconnect between his immense popularity and his limited range. Teen girls screamed at his personal appearances and bought magazines with his face on the cover, while critics routinely savaged his performances as wooden and emotionless. "When the lights went on, the brain didn't," Carson quipped to his producers after interviewing Hunter in the early 1970s. The line captured what Carson saw as Hunter's fundamental problem, a complete inability to think and feel authentically while performing. Carson was particularly amused by directors' attempts to work around Hunter's limitations. He noted how Hunter's films often minimized his dialogue, surrounded him with stronger actors who could carry scenes, and relied heavily on his physical presence rather than emotional range. "Johnny had this theory about Tab Hunter," explained a former NBC executive. He believed Hunter was an example of the audience projecting whatever they wanted onto a beautiful blank canvas. The less actual personality he displayed, the more effectively teenage girls could imagine him as their ideal boyfriend. Ironically, Carson's assessment of Hunter became more sympathetic in later years, particularly after Hunter's 2005 autobiography revealed he had been gay during his years as a teen heartthrob, forced to live a carefully constructed lie that may have contributed to his stiff performances. "When Hunter's book came out, Johnny had already passed away," noted a friend of Carson's, "but I think he would have revised his opinion somewhat. He might have recognized that Hunter's woodenness came partly from the psychological strain of maintaining a false identity while cameras rolled." Nevertheless, during his Tonight Show years, Carson considered Hunter the perfect example of a studio-created star whose appearance completely overshadowed his ability, or lack thereof. While Hunter represented the male version of manufactured stardom, our next subject demonstrated that the pattern could be replicated multiple times with diminishing returns.
"You want thrills, you've got thrills. My arms, my lips are here to thrill you."
Mamie Van Doren, the assembly line starlet. If Johnny Carson found Jane Mansfield's limited acting ability frustrating, he considered Mamie Van Doren something closer to a punchline, a copy of a copy that revealed Hollywood's cynical approach to manufacturing female stars. "She makes cardboard look expressive," Carson once quipped about Van Doren after she appeared on his show in the late 1960s. The line, delivered to his staff during a post-show wrap-up, captured his assessment of her wooden performances and limited range. In Carson's view, Van Doren represented the studio system at its most nakedly calculating. After Marilyn Monroe became a sensation, studios scrambled to create similar blonde bombshells. first Jane Mansfield at 20th Century Fox, then Van Doren at Universal. Each iteration in Carson's assessment came with diminished acting capability. Johnny had this theory about the blonde bombshell assembly line, explained his former talent coordinator. He'd say, they started with Marilyn, who actually had talent beneath the packaging. Then they created Jane, who had the packaging but minimal talent. By the time they got to Mamie, they weren't even trying to find someone who could act. They just needed the measurements and platinum hair. What particularly struck Carson about Van Doren was her seeming inability to deliver even simple dialogue convincingly. During her Tonight Show appearances, he noticed how she would carefully recite prepared answers rather than engaging in genuine conversation, a habit he found revealing of her limitations as a performer. "She's a wind-up doll," Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon after one particularly stilted Van Doren interview. "You just point her in a direction and hope she doesn't bump into the furniture." Carson's critical assessment of Van Doren stemmed partly from what he saw as cynicism on the studio's part, the belief that audiences wouldn't notice or care about acting ability as long as the physical packaging met expectations. This approach to star-making offended Carson's respect for genuine craft. Johnny believed audiences deserved better, said a director who knew Carson socially. He thought it was almost insulting to viewers, this assumption that they couldn't tell the difference between someone with genuine talent and someone who was just filling a physical template. Despite his private criticism, Carson maintained professional courtesy during Van Doren's appearances on The Tonight Show. He never publicly mocked her limitations and gave her the same platform he offered other celebrities. His true assessment remained behind closed doors, shared only with his inner circle. While Van Doren represented the nadir of the blonde bombshell production line in Carson's estimation, our next subject demonstrated that even male stars, who eventually developed into capable actors, could begin their careers with performances so limited they became legendary for their awkwardness.
Stanley? Oh, Stanley, you directed it. Oh, that's why you look familiar. All right.
Tony Curtis, from Brooklyn to ancient Rome, badly. Unlike most entries on Carson's list of terrible actors, Tony Curtis eventually developed into a performer Carson genuinely respected. But his early career performances, particularly his infamously miscast historical roles, remained a source of amusement for Carson throughout his life. "Yonda lies the castle of my fada." This line, delivered by Curtis in a thick Brooklyn accent, while playing a medieval knight in 1954's The Black Shield of Falworth, became one of Carson's favorite examples of Hollywood miscasting. He would reference it repeatedly throughout his Tonight Show tenure, using it as shorthand for acting that completely shattered an audience's suspension of disbelief. "Johnny had a special appreciation for the Curtis phenomenon," explained a longtime friend of Carson's. "Here was this kid from the Bronx with an accent you could cut with a knife, and Universal kept casting him as Vikings, Arabian princes, and medieval knights. Johnny found it both hilarious and strangely admirable in its audacity." What made Curtis particularly interesting to Carson was watching his evolution from pretty face to legitimate actor. Unlike others on Carson's list who never improved, Curtis actually developed genuine skill through determined effort and study. He got better, but Hollywood forgives accents faster than audiences do, Carson reportedly commented after interviewing Curtis in the 1970s. The observation reflected Carson's understanding of how initial impressions could haunt an actor's career despite subsequent growth. Carson's fascination with Curtis's early performances stemmed partly from what he saw as Hollywood's willingness to ignore obvious incongruities if a performer had the right look. Curtis's handsome features and marketable personality trumped considerations like whether audiences would believe him as an Arabian prince while speaking like he'd just stepped off the streets of New York. Johnny used Curtis as a teaching example for his writers, recalled a former head writer for The Tonight Show. He'd say, "This is why credibility matters. Once the audience is laughing at your accent when they're supposed to be caught up in the story, you've lost them completely." Despite this criticism of his early work, Carson developed genuine respect for Curtis as his career progressed. Performances in Sweet Smell of Success, 1957, and The Defiant Ones, 1958, demonstrated growth that Carson appreciated, evidence that Curtis had committed to improving his craft rather than simply coasting on his appearance. By the 1970s, when Curtis was a regular Tonight Show guest, Carson treated him with the respect accorded a legitimate actor while occasionally still teasing him about his early performances. This combination of recognition for growth while remembering past limitations made Curtis unique among Carson's gallery of acting challenge stars. Curtis, to his credit, was a good sport about his early limitations. He would laugh along with Carson's gentle ribbing and acknowledge the absurdity of some of his early roles, a self-awareness that Carson found refreshing compared to stars who maintained pretensions despite obvious shortcomings. While Curtis represented a success story of growth beyond limitations, our final entry on Carson's list embodied something different. A celebrity famous primarily for being herself, with little interest in portraying anyone else.
Don't compare me with Miss Hemsley. She owes $60 million for Americans. That's when I just hit a cop because she called me dirty names.
Zsa Zsa Gabor, the ultimate non-actor. If Johnny Carson's critique of most limited actors centered on their inability to convincingly portray characters, his assessment of Zsa Zsa Gabor was slightly different. She never even tried. She acted like a star, but never like a character, Carson reportedly told his producers after one of Gabor's many appearances on The Tonight Show. The observation captured what he saw as her fundamental approach to entertainment, Zsa Zsa playing Zsa Zsa, regardless of the role. Gabor appeared on The Tonight Show numerous times throughout Carson's tenure. She was reliable entertainment, glamorous, outrageous, and always ready with a witty retort. But Carson privately noted that these same qualities appeared in every film role she played, with no discernible difference between the woman on his couch and any character she supposedly portrayed on screen. Johnny had a theory about Zsa Zsa, explained his former talent coordinator. He believed she had made a deliberate decision early in her career that being Zsa Zsa Gabor was more interesting and profitable than developing the skill to play other people, and he had to admit she wasn't wrong. What fascinated Carson about Gabor was her complete comfort with this approach. Unlike other limited actors who aspired to dramatic credibility they couldn't achieve, Gabor seemed entirely content to simply be herself in various costumes and settings. She's made an art form out of not acting, Carson once remarked to Ed McMahon during a commercial break following a Gabor segment. At least she knows exactly what she's doing. Carson particularly noted how Gabor had perfected the ability to make her limitations seem intentional, as though playing varied characters would be beneath someone of her sophistication. Her signature dawling delivery and Hungarian accent remained consistent whether she was playing a wealthy socialite or, implausibly, a frontier woman in a Western. Johnny appreciated her honesty, in a way, said a former NBC executive who worked closely with Carson. Most bad actors pretend to be creating different characters while actually just playing themselves. Zsa Zsa cut out the middleman. She just played Zsa Zsa and collected the check. Despite this critical assessment, Carson genuinely enjoyed Gabor as a Tonight Show guest. Her self-awareness, quick wit, and unabashed embrace of her public persona made her entertaining television, even if those same qualities limited her effectiveness in dramatic roles. She showed up for interviews, not acting awards, Carson once commented, capturing the essence of Gabor's career strategy. She had found a niche that required no traditional acting skill, but still brought fame, fortune, and a certain kind of immortality. In Carson's gallery of limited actors, Gabor occupied a special place, someone who had turned non-acting into its own art form, creating a template for future celebrities who would become famous primarily for playing themselves. What Johnny's list reveals about Hollywood. Johnny Carson's private assessments of these 6 performers, Sonny Tufts, Jane Mansfield, Tab Hunter, Mamie Van Doren, Tony Curtis, and Zsa Zsa Gabor, reveal more than just his personal tastes. They offer insights into how Hollywood's star-making machinery operated during the Golden Age and beyond. Johnny understood something fundamental about the film industry, explained a director who knew Carson well. Acting ability was just one of many qualities studios considered when manufacturing stars, and often not the most important one. What connected most of Carson's terrible actors was their extraordinary visual appeal. Tufts, Mansfield, Hunter, Van Doren, and the young Curtis were all strikingly attractive people who photographed beautifully, a quality that studios correctly assessed would draw audiences regardless of performance quality. Johnny used to say that Hollywood operated on a sliding scale, recalled his former head writer. The more beautiful you were, the less talented you needed to be. He believed most studios would rather have a gorgeous performer with limited range than an ordinary-looking person with extraordinary skill. This cynical but accurate assessment explained how performers with obvious limitations could achieve and maintain stardom during the studio era. The system wasn't designed to find the most skilled actors. It was designed to create marketable products that audiences would pay to see. Johnny saw the whole picture because of his unique position, noted a former NBC executive. He interviewed these people year after year, watched their careers rise and fall, saw them on good days and bad days. No film critic or entertainment reporter had that kind of sustained, intimate exposure to so many stars over decades. Carson's list also reveals how the nature of stardom evolved throughout his tenure on The Tonight Show. Early entries like Tufts and the Young Curtis represented the old studio system's approach to manufacturing stars regardless of suitability for specific roles. Later examples like Gabor pointed toward our modern celebrity culture, where being famous often matters more than the ostensible talents that created that fame. Johnny watched the entire transition, explained a television historian who studied Carson's career. He began his career interviewing stars from the tail end of the studio system and ended it talking to people who were famous primarily for being famous. He saw the whole evolution of celebrity culture from a front row seat. What makes Carson's assessments particularly valuable is that they came from direct personal interaction rather than just watching performances on screen. The Tonight Show format, unscripted conversation requiring guests to think on their feet, often revealed limitations that carefully edited and directed film performances could conceal. Johnny believed the talk show format was the great equalizer, said his former producer. You couldn't hide behind editing or multiple takes. You had to be present, responsive, and genuine, qualities that genuinely limited performers simply couldn't fake. Despite his sometimes cutting private assessments, Carson maintained a professional respect for the entertainment industry throughout his career. He understood that creating successful entertainment required different kinds of performers, from classically trained thespians to personality-driven stars who never pretended to be anything else. Johnny wasn't a snob about it, emphasized a friend who knew him well. He could appreciate Laurence Olivier's Hamlet and also enjoy Zaza being Zaza. He just didn't like pretension, people claiming artistic depth they clearly didn't possess. This balanced perspective made Carson an ideal chronicler of Hollywood's evolution. He could recognize genuine talent while also understanding the commercial realities that often prioritized marketability over ability. His private list of terrible actors wasn't merely catty gossip. It was a seasoned professional's assessment of an industry he understood intimately. Carson's list also reveals something about the man himself, his genuine respect for craft and authenticity beneath his affable public persona. The same qualities that made him television's greatest interviewer, his attention to detail, his ability to read people, his understanding of performance, made him an astute judge of acting ability. Johnny cared about authenticity, concluded his longtime producer. Whether he was watching a dramatic performance or interviewing a guest, he could instantly sense when someone was genuine versus when they were faking it. That's what connected all the people on his terrible actors list. They couldn't convince him they were truly inhabiting another person's reality. In the end, Carson's private assessments of these 6 performers offer a window not just into his personal tastes, but into the complex relationship between talent, appearance, and stardom that defined Hollywood's golden age. Insights from television's most discerning witness to 6 decades of entertainment history.